Today on the Sports Reporters, the return of the running back and the stunning disintegration of the Jets' best-laid plans. In Philly, Joel Embiid gets called out, while at UConn, dreams of a three-peat are starting to take shape. I'm Jeremy Schaap, and here are today's Sports Reporters.
I'm Tiki Barber. Don't talk to me about my Cavaliers getting beat up by Notre Dame, and maybe only a little bit about the New York Giants.
I'm John Fanta, and I'm a diehard Cleveland sports fan, but football season is well over for me. I'm glad it's basketball season right now because the Cavaliers have had an unbelievable start to the season, and now I'm covering college basketball, currently coming to you from the home of the back-to-back reigning national champion, UConn Huskies, a thing that our other sports reporter might know a thing or two about.
Yeah, fortunately, thank you, John. Christopher Russo. Right now, I'm more into Northern Arizona University basketball because of assistant coach Tim Russo. But it's a pleasure to be on a show. I haven't been here for 20-something years. And guess who the host was? Jeremy's dad, Dick. That's the last time on a reporter. So the thrill is mine. How about that?
I remember when you were on the show back in the old days, Chris. And while Tiki's never been a panelist before, you were a frequent subject during your playing career. And John's really the only sports reporter's newbie, entirely new to the show. But let's start with the NFL, as we typically do at this time of year. One of the things that we were all led to believe was that the running back was dead, obsolete, a relic, a dinosaur, an anachronism, however you want to put it. And now we've got Saquon Barkley doing what he's been doing, Derrick Henry doing what he's been doing. Was the report of the position's demise exaggerated, Tiki?
I think it's exaggerated because good running backs on bad teams are worth paying. And that's what it has always been. It's not about you don't need a running back. It's about it's not worth paying a running back. But if you're the Baltimore Ravens and you need a guy to come be the dude like Derrick Henry, you go get him. If you're the Philadelphia Eagles, when you need a guy to go be that dude, you go get Saquon Barkley. If you're the Houston Texans, who were a surprise playoff team a year ago, and you need a guy to go be that dude, you go get Joe Mixon. So I think it's just good running backs on bad teams is what made us think that the running back was obsolete.
John.
Well, I think when you look at it, the Baltimore Ravens and Derrick Henry, we said for Baltimore, they've got to be able to generate a powerful running game to complement Lamar Jackson, who's quite the runner himself. By the same token, look at the Detroit Lions, who are 9-1 for the first time since the 1930s. But they do it in different ways. It's Jahmyr Gibbs who can deliver for them. It's David Montgomery who's had some standout performances. They have a nice diet. I think as much as we're seeing a Derrick Henry, right, or a Josh Jacobs who have been terrific this season, you can do it in different ways. But the NFL, like any sports league, it's about trends. I think we're seeing it in the NBA a little bit with, oh, the big man's dead, the big man this. Look, if you can find a differentiator on the field that might be a trend that people are saying is dying, the leagues zig and zag through the years. And that's what we're seeing in the National Football League is, oh, quarterback league, pass, pass, pass. Well, every defensive coordinator, Chris, is going to try to adjust to that. And now over the last 2-3 years, we're seeing teams say, you know what, everybody's gone 5 out. They're spreading people out. Let's get back to ground and pound and see what can happen. And I think that's what we're seeing.
I'll go back, John, to what Tiki said. You need a running back, but you don't need to pay the guy $30 million a year to be the running back. I mean, listen, we can go crazy on Derrick Henry. They got 4 losses this year, and they're going to be the 5th seed if they're lucky. And last year, they were the number 1 seed in the AFC. Allen's the key to Buffalo. The Chiefs lose Pacheco. They're 9-1. I mean, Arizona's had a good year. We're going to sit there and say their running backs are in the Hall of Fame. Look at the Rams, who have a good Williams, good little running back. He's not making $20 million a year. I understand Dallas doesn't have a running back. So I understand you need somebody to carry the football. You need a good one. You don't need to pay somebody $30 million. You need a good one.
I think it's different if you have a running back who can be explosive. right? Because think about where the game has gone. It's all about explosive plays, and it's why, John, what you were just talking about, defensive coordinators, they're going to figure it out. They're not going to let you throw the ball over defensive backs' heads 8 times a game anymore. And so you're getting these shell coverages, which you've heard a lot about this year. But the reality is to go station to station in the NFL, meaning first down, first down, first down, first down, first down. Maybe you get in the red zone and you score. That's hard, right? It's hard to get first downs after first downs. But if you have a guy who can go get you 50 yards or a 40-yard play, that guy is worth paying. That's why wide receivers are getting paid so much. And there's only been a couple of guys in the NFL over the last couple of years that have been able to do that on the ground. Saquon Barkley is one, obviously, and Derrick Henry is another, and Christian McCaffrey. But Christian McCaffrey is the cautionary tale because he's been hurt so much in his career. He's amazing when he's healthy. But when he's hurt, it makes it feel like it's not worth him to pay him $19 million a year.
It all still starts with the quarterback. If you don't have a quarterback who is a big-time player, you are not winning in the NFL. And that's why Allen and Mahomes and Lamar, Stafford, that's why these guys, have usually put – Rodgers is obviously a little past his prime, but that's why you see these guys. Goff's very good. That's why you see these guys year in and year out, these teams, be effective. You need the quarterback to make the big play for you, and if he runs, even better. I mean, Allen's the best running back that Buffalo has, for crying out loud. So it's sort of a combination, as Tiki said, big plays. You need a decent back. I just don't think you need to kill your salary cap with a guy making $30 million a year.
Well, on that subject, though, Chris, let's talk specifically a little bit more about Saquon Barkley and the decisions that he made, that the Giants organization made, going all in on Daniel Jones. Now that is over. He's done. He's never going to take another snap probably as a Giants quarterback. Saquon Barkley's playing so well for a division rival. They're 8-2. What does the Saquon situation, what's happened vis-a-vis New York and Philadelphia, what does it say to you, Tiki?
I had the Philadelphia Eagles a couple of weeks ago. I called their game. And it was interesting as we sat down with Saquon before the game, and we were just asking him what it feels like to be here with a rival. And the thing he said, I'm learning now something that didn't happen in New York on how to be patient, how to be a big play runner. And they can do it because they have a better offensive line, they have a better quarterback, and they have 2 stud wide receivers who make it so much easier for their offense to operate. And so he's in a better place. That's why he's doing so well.
Well, it's hard to be in a worse place than the New York Giants. It's hard to be in a worse place than either New York football franchise right now, frankly. I mean, let's face it. Saquon Barkley to the Philadelphia Eagles is an egg on the face to the New York Giants and their fan base, to an ownership group that knows what championships look like because they have produced them, but apparently they have forgotten what their glory was and what they've been founded on and who they are as an organization. That was an embarrassment then, and you knew it. You know why? Because of what's happened now. And I think that when we talk about this running back situation, Tiki, you sum it up. Saquon's around a winning situation, but make no mistake about it. For the New York Giants, that was an utter embarrassment then, and dog, it's even more so now, because at the end of the day, they thought that Daniel Jones, they thought they needed to give him this contract because they thought he was their savior, and that's how the quarterback position's gotten so inflated that you have some teams who right now are staring in the mirror at embarrassment because of the fact of how much they got it wrong. The New York Giants come to mind. Certainly the Cleveland Browns come to mind as well. And right now, the New York Jets, I get that they tried, but they're looking themselves in the mirror saying, we've got to get a new quarterback ourselves. Saquon Barkley's in a better position because he's got better players around him. But for the Giants, that's an utter embarrassment.
Well, Jacksonville's another team that probably overpaid for a quarterback because he's not worth $275 million. Here's what I would say about the Giants, though. If you put Barkley on his team, let's ask Tiki. They'd still be 2-8. I mean, nobody's going to convince
They're not any better.
Worth an extra win, maybe. I mean, they'd still be a bad team. And that goes with what you guys say. He's got 2 big receivers. He's got a good offensive line. Hurts is a good quarterback. So, I mean, he's in the right situation right now where he can flourish. On the Giants, without a tight end, a young receiver in Neighbors, and a quarterback who isn't good, I mean, he'd still be sort of a little lost, in the situation 2 years ago. He had a good year, great game against Minnesota, and the Giants got caught between a rock and a hard place because at the end of the 2022 season, Jones was playing well. They won a playoff game in Minnesota. He played really well in the game. He got a standing ovation at MetLife when they clinched the playoff spot against the Colts last week. So Giants are in a tricky situation. Okay, maybe finally he's going to blossom. We got the right coaching staff around him. So let's give him a contract. And they did a good thing. They didn't go kill themselves with this long-term extension, but let's give him a contract.
Right.
And as it turns out, it's going to be a mistake because Jones is not very good. So from that standpoint, I think one decision with the quarterback is not the same as the running back position. I mean, they gave Jones the money, and he turned out to not be very good, and they look bad. I don't think it's so much about Barkley as it is about the quarterback.
All right, we'd be remiss if we didn't address the 3-win team in New York, the Jets, and Joe Douglas is gone now. Robert Saleh is gone. These were the guys who brought in Aaron Rodgers, who thought, we're going to win a Super Bowl with this guy. When we start to assess the magnitude of this catastrophe with Aaron Rodgers, where do we even start, Chris?
That's a very good question. Well, I think you start at the quarterback situation because they drafted Zach Wilson with the second pick in the draft, and he turned out to be a bust, which put them in desperate situation. And they made a run like they did once before with Favre. They made a run with Rodgers. Nobody in New York did not like that decision. So if you think, I don't know what Tiki said, but I know the fans thought it was the right move. I know 2 years ago he wasn't very good for the Packers. He looked like he was descending. Last year, you can't read on it, but, we kind of gave him a break with that last year in Green Bay. Every Jet fan was all in. Rodgers, I thought they'd have a great year. I thought he'd bounce back. They were due for some good fortune. And it turns out, he is an average quarterback. And I don't want to say he's shot, but he's not that good. So and nobody could have predicted that. Not that much of a decline. So to me, Saleh's not Weeb Eubank. Joe Douglas is a lot of misses with free agents and draft. Obviously, he hired Saleh, drafted Wilson. But to me, when I look at the Jets' current situation, want to kill Woody Johnson? Go ahead. But I'm going to kill the idea that they thought they had their Patrick Mahomes in Zach Wilson, and he turned out to be a disaster. And I think that's got a lot to do with where they are right now.
It's interesting you say that, Chris, because if you miss on a franchise quarterback, I put that in quotes, the top 5 or top 10 pick or whatever that's supposed to be your guy for the future, and you've completely missed, it sets you back half a decade, right? Because you now are kind of making a decision off of what you hope he's going to be, even if he's never going to get there. And so the Jets, as we saw there were 2 off seasons ago, they got desperate. And so knowing that Zach had failed, or they had failed him, I think is more appropriate. They didn't have the right kind of structure around him to groom him into the quarterback that he needed to be in the NFL. But when that failed, they got desperate, and they go and they grab an aging Aaron Rodgers, which on paper sounds amazing. But Aaron Rodgers isn't the same player that he was when he was 36 years old or 37 or even 38. And coming to a new environment on a bad turf, which is something you have to consider because so many people have gotten hurt on this AstroTurf at MetLife Stadium, it almost felt like it was inevitable that this kind of destruction, this kind of falling apart was going to happen to this Jet team. And now it's gotten worse with the firing of Joe Douglas, and they're just resetting now in place. The question is, what happens with Aaron Rodgers going forward?
The New York Jets culture has been broken for quite some time, and Aaron Rodgers was not going to be the one to repair that. The fact is, when he's been on the shelf the last year and change, he produced more headlines that would lead you to divisiveness and would lead you to getting concerned if you're a Jet fan than you would be hopeful of what the New York Jets situation is. And they not only brought him in, and I can understand, I'll give the Jets credit for this, and Dan Patrick brought this up on your show, Jeremy, in the last episode. He said he at least understands that the Jets went for it. They went and took a shot. It didn't work out. But they not only got him, look at how much they've done to sell their soul for him to go out and basically control what their moves are organizationally. The quarterback position is the most important, perhaps in all of sports. I think that is the absolute truth in any sport. But when you sell your soul to this degree, to a guy that, as Chris said, looked over the hill in his last stop, this felt inevitable.
All right, let's talk NBA. We're a month into the season. At this point, John, what's your biggest takeaway from what we've seen?
Well, the Eastern Conference only has 4 teams that are over 500. 4 teams. Now, the story is the Cleveland Cavaliers. And I'm not just saying that because I'm from Cleveland. It's because they've started 15-0 and nobody in their right mind had the Cleveland Cavs starting the season this strong. Now, can you be skeptical? Can you say it's Boston's to lose in the East until someone proves otherwise? Absolutely. And I think that is the right take. The Celtics, they're going to have a cakewalk to at least the Eastern Conference Finals, but Cleveland looks like a real adversary. Why? Why do the Cavs look so good? Why have they gotten off to this type of a start? Well, if you look at Cleveland's organizational trajectory, to be able to get Donovan Mitchell to sign an extension, remember when Mitchell agreed with the Cavs? Tiki, dog, surely you had calls. Tiki, I know you had calls from Knick fans saying, well, someday he'll be ours. He'll be a New York Knick. Donovan Mitchell will be in New York. That was the consensus from everybody. The Cleveland Cavaliers, Cleveland, this is Cleveland we're talking about. Yes, I'm from the town. They do not sign marquee players to new contracts. They get those players for a couple of years. I cried when Jim Thome left. I was 6 or 7 years old and he left town, and I thought, I want him to be a Cleveland Indian forever. In Cleveland, they don't agree with people to keep them on their teams, nor alone do the people agree to stay. Donovan Mitchell stays. Evan Mobley's only 23. Darius Garland's 24. That's a young core. And if you talk to anybody around the Brooklyn Nets, they loved Kenny Atkinson and what he built. Jared Allen and Karis LeVert know that. They're part of that Cavs organization. And Kobe Altman, Mike Gansey in that group. Yes, LeBron James is the reason why that organization broke through in 2016 and won a championship. But that climate in that front office, in that locker room, has been one built on, we're going to bet on our young stars getting better. We'll take some shortcomings if it means we can get to this point. And what this point right now is that Cleveland should be taken seriously. The Cavs are off to a heck of a start.
So, John, the one thing when you talk about, Atkinson and Darius Garland and how great this team has been, it's one of the few basketball teams that I watch on a regular basis, and I feel like they care, right? Sometimes in the NBA, you get into this grind. I mean, it's a long season where the games don't mean that much. And you talk about teams in the East getting over 500. It took the Knicks beating the Nets twice over the weekend in those tournament games for them to get over 500. And so I'm not saying that these teams don't care, but I watch the Cleveland Cavaliers, and it means something to them. And I think that is valuable, something that is clearly worked into them by their coaching staff. It's the same thing that Kenny Atkinson did when he was in Brooklyn with the Nets, and why they moved on him because of Kyrie and KD and those guys makes no sense to me. But it's the reality of basketball. When you care, you have just a little bit of an advantage over everybody else.
Well, let's talk about that caring, right, Chris? Because as we speak, our colleague at ESPN, Shams Charania, is reporting that Tyrese Maxey is saying that Joel Embiid needs to do a better job of showing up for team activities on time. Joel Embiid's already had that run-in with a reporter where he shoved him this season. It's obviously been a slow start, but Embiid hasn't been playing much. How do you think what we're talking about applies to the situation in Philadelphia, Chris?
Embiid, let me get this straight. Embiid can play in the Olympics in August, fresh as a daisy, and he barely can play now? I don't quite understand that. The George thing, he never wins. I don't understand that either. That is the most overrated front office and one of the most overrated teams that has been created by the media in a lot of ways in this Eastern Conference in a long time. I mean, Embiid has never played in the conference final. He's never played in the conference final. And every time I see him in a Game 7, this franchise or him, they get blown out. Did we forget 2 years ago when they got destroyed in Game 7 by the Celtics? Did we forget 3 years ago when the Heat killed them in 6 games? I mean, they are so overrated. And part of it might be culture. Embiid never plays, hurt. Excellent point, Maxey, about doesn't show up. Until Philadelphia does something, can we mellow out on the 2-11 76ers? For 1 second. How's that? Overrated.
Yeah, so you were talking about the Celtics and these other playoff runs the last couple of years. We and a bunch of our WFAN listeners went down and invaded Philadelphia, that Game 6. And by the end of it, they were nothing but Knicks fans in the joint. It's almost like the fan base doesn't even believe in them. You know what I mean? They got hammered over the head with this stupid process thing for so long, and Joel Embiid is the remnants of that. And so they don't believe. It was full of Knicks fans. It was unbelievable how many Knicks fans invaded a playoff game. This wasn't like, next week. This is a playoff game in Philadelphia.
Look, the other thing with Joel Embiid, I mentioned it earlier, was that run-in with the reporter, Joel Embiid taking exception to what was mentioned in a column, shoving him, being suspended. He's also been hurt. When we look at the state of the athlete-media relationship, the athletes, the reporters who cover them. John, what do we see now?
We see social media creating a lot of chaos, some of which is true and some of which are things that we are saying and reporting. Others of which are just not wholly true or things that are selected from what we're saying. And let's face it, when you go on a platform right now, you're going to see a whole bunch of you-know-what. And some of it, again, is accurate, but other stuff is not. And I just think now more than ever, there's a direct pathway. I cover college basketball very closely. And guys, every Monday, I put out an all-national college basketball team where I'm putting together 5 players that shined in the past week. And this past Monday, I put out the list, and I proceeded to get multiple messages from other players who follow me saying, why wasn't I on the list? Why didn't you put me on the list? And that's where we're at in this climate of you've got a direct access to me and vice versa. I'm pretty honest with the players in terms of what I think, and I'm going to stand for what I believe in. But I do think that now more than ever, we are in a culture that can be very divisive because you could get one sentence that you've said taken, put into a bite, and it appears everywhere. And it appears in enough places that somebody's relative, somebody's friend can text it over to a person. I mean, I've heard from coaches who say, hey, I got this sent to me. What'd you mean by that? We get that now more than ever, and I'm sure both of you do. You two are established. I'm the young, 20-something-year-old here that's trying to learn from you two because, dog, I know you don't give a damn what people think of what you say. But we're in a culture and a climate of where that rules every single day. And there's a sensitivity in our world where if you're going to be critical, you're going to get met with criticism right back to you.
I think I grew up in an era where I was unaware of what people were saying about me. And so as a result, I didn't care. I didn't know if you were lifting me up or cutting me down. And so I just learned to not care about the opinions of those that don't know me. And that's the biggest thing. But in today's generation of these young athletes, and they're professionals and they're young athletes, they grew up on social media seeing everything that everybody wrote about them. And I'm not just talking about their sports worlds. I'm talking about their personal lives, their things that they were doing on Instagram or TikTok or whatever it may have been when they were 12 years old. And so they've learned that this is normal behavior. And so whenever something gets said about an athlete, they take it personally. Even though me or Chris or you, John, we're not personally attacking you. We're just attacking or talking about what our opinion is about you. And so I think because it feels personal, because to them, a Twitter post or X or whatever it is now, an Instagram post or whatever it may be, it feels like it's personal when it's not. It's just a reaction. You know what I mean? It's just how we are evaluating as journalists, as entertainers, what we say or see about these athletes.
100%. I'll tell you a little story that's interesting. I was out there with Northern Arizona last week. They had a game in Stanford and Pacific. So one of the days on Wednesday, we went to a Buffalo Wild Wings, and they had the basketball games and all the NBA games. This was last Wednesday. And I was trying to bring up Bird, the 86 Celtics, Magic, Jerry West. And I was shocked. These are 18-year-old college kids who play. They think sports began basically in 2010. I said, guys,
yes.
Have you heard of Larry Bird? They were telling me that Jerry West can't, is nowhere near as good as Kobe Bryant. What are you, crazy? Jerry West brought basketball to Southern California, shot 49% from the field in his career without the three-point line. So the historical aspect of these athletes today, they have no clue of what they did 30, 40, 50. Jackie Robinson, the whole nine. And I think that adds to this component that they're very naive and they don't like the criticism, as Tiki said. They're very curious on the social media. They're looking at their phone constantly. And I think it develops this relationship of an it's not cordial between the person who covers it and the person who plays it. Tiki's got a huge advantage. This is a borderline Hall of Fame running back. So when he walks into a football room, Barkley's going to know who Tiki Barber is. John and I don't have that advantage.
Right.
They don't want to hear from me. They don't want to hear from John. You never played. You're too old. No. What do you know? What do you mean, what do I know? I've been doing this for 43 years. All I've been doing is covering sports. So the dichotomy between the athlete today and where he was 30, 40 years ago that's the biggest change in sports media, is the fact that there's no relationship with the present athlete and the guy who covers sports today. And that's sad. There's a lot of reasons for it, but that is sad.
Now, Tiki, you're much too humble to take exception to Chris's borderline comment, but I'm going to say as a Giants fan, not borderline. Should be in the Hall of Fame. John.
Right.
John.
Maybe one of these years.
You know what? We don't have any brothers in yet. We could get two from your team at some point, right? We'd have the Mannings and the Barbers both in the Hall of Fame. That would be nice. Let's talk college basketball. John, you are in stores, as we can all see, the self-proclaimed capital of basketball, global capital of basketball, at least right now. Danny Hurley's team hasn't lost in 9 months. Number 2 ranked. Repeat.
It is possible. It is absolutely possible because what Dan Hurley has built is a masterful offensive system that is intricate, that is based on European basketball. He and his staff, Luke Murray, Kamani Young, Tom Moore, what they've been able to piece together here is nothing short of tremendous. Last 2 years, they've ended up number 1 in Ken Pom offense. In the analytics, they have been the best offensive team in college basketball. They've also been at the top of the charts in blocked shots. Currently in college basketball, they lead the country in blocked shots. So defensively, they funnel everything towards the rim, and they're averaging 10 to 11 blocks per game here the last 3 seasons. It's amazing, but then you understand where Dan Hurley comes from. The Jersey City roots, his father, all the concepts that he's learned, and the fact that when he took this Connecticut job, Connecticut was in a state of, we're lost right now. We're not who we were under Jim Calhoun. And Kevin Ollie had a glimpse, but after that, it ended pretty poorly. And for Dan Hurley, I think that gave him the chip on his shoulder of, I've got a challenge here. I got to get this thing back to where it belongs. But he's a Hurley, and he lived in the shadows of his father and of his brother, who accounted for the back-to-back national championships at Duke in the early 90s. And I think that Dan, that drives Dan every day. In a lot of ways, Jeremy and fellas, the climate of today, of social media, and of all of that, Hurley goes against that in his recruiting. Alex Caravan, his best player, is barely existent on social media. Liam McNeely, his freshman, his 5-star freshman, is this very melancholy, calm guy that comes up to you, shakes your hand, and doesn't really care about how many stars are going to be next to his name or where he's going to get drafted, even though he's going to get drafted pretty high next June. There's just a focus on basketball. And if you haven't spent time in Stores, Connecticut, you guys have probably spent some time. I know, Mad Dog, you have. Basketball is what they use to get them through the winters here. It is the sole focus. And winning championships is the standard when you walk into these buildings. And that's what Hurley has done. He doesn't get complacent because it's not in his blood. And so, yes, they can three-peat because they've mastered their personnel, and they don't need the highest NIL pot to get the players they want because the players want to win titles and get drafted. 4 Huskies drafted last June.
John, I was just going to ask you, because we've seen this all across, not just basketball, but just college sports in general. Almost every coach ends up having to recruit their guys that they've already recruited. How has Dan been able to not let that become a problem? Like guys transferring out, like I want to be the guy and I'm not getting enough playing time and someone else is chirping in their ear or whatever it may be and then they transfer. That hasn't happened to him. And it's rare for any college program, major college program these days because somebody is always trying to pilfer good teams from their best players. How has he managed to, I don't know, mitigate that in some ways?
Well, Dog knows this with his son having worked alongside the UConn staff and being a part of national championship before he's moved on to Northern Arizona and Tim having success there. It's that Dan Hurley is unapologetically himself, Tiki. Like if you're not up for what he's putting down, then he'll walk out the room and he's not going to ask you to stay in the room. So he's very comfortable in his own skin. And you know what that is? He's comfortable making you uncomfortable as a player, of finding your weaknesses and turning them into strengths, of telling you the honest truth, similar to his counterpart on the women's side who's been doing it for 40 years. And this week, it's appropriate that we're talking a little college basketball from UConn. Gino Auriemma becomes the all-time winningest coach in college basketball history. But UConn has put together a system that, one, you could tell a player, if you put in the work, we will get you on the draft stage. We will get you drafted. So you're going to accomplish your dream. Number two, winning comes first here. And here's why. Here's how. We have the banners to prove it. You either want to be a part of that or you don't. That's culture. That's what Dan Hurley's built, Dog.
You know, it's funny. 3 years ago, freshman Danny's first he needed to win that game, and he lost to New Mexico State in the opening round of the NCAA, and a lot of people wondered about Danny. So it's a combination of his philosophy that he stuck to and some of the players. They have great players at UConn. I got to be fair. You know, you can be a great coach, but you got to have the players. And then Caravan has been a wonderful player for the 4 years that he's been there. So a lot of it's the coaching staff. A lot of it's the culture. It's a great place to play if you love college basketball. It does get you through the wintertime. No pro sports teams in the state, in Stores, Connecticut, but they have talent. And in basketball, like NFL, you have to have a quarterback. In basketball, you got to have the players. And they've had a lot of them in these last 2 or 3 years. That's got a long way. That's got a lot to do with the fact they've won the back-to-back titles.
The other dominant men's program of the last 30 years, of course, Duke. Cooper Flagg. When you see him, John, what do you think?
He's a specimen. He's the #1 pick in next June's draft. To be at his height, around 6'10" or so, 6'9.5", and to be able to use his length defensively. He is as gifted a defensive player as I've covered in college basketball, and I've steadily covered this sport for the last 10 years. I haven't covered sports for as long as these other sports reporters who are with me today. But this guy is defensively gifted like no other. On the offensive end of the floor, he's just so aggressive, and he uses that aggressiveness to glide to the rim. It's like time stops when he's on the attack. The jumper is coming along. It's been an area that he's been progressing on, but because of his relentless work ethic, I think it's going to come together for him, and I do think he's going to have a 15-year playing career that will feature him being a main piece on a contending team. He is one of the most unique prospects because he comes from the state of Maine. He's a small-town kid who was discovered at a young age and has become this folk hero in the state of Maine, a state that hasn't been known to produce these a plethora of basketball prospects. Down at the Peach Jam, guys, the legendary EYBL Nike event, there's a Peach Jam team now 2 summers ago named Maine United. They probably will never appear in Peach Jam again. They appeared because they have Cooper Flagg on their team. Now it's up to John Shire, who's in his 3rd year at the helm, to be able to fully figure out what happens around Flagg, because that Duke team has what it takes to contend for a national championship. Let's see if they can do it. But Cooper Flagg, guys, is so uniquely talented, and he's great for college basketball because he gives this sport some juice during a time of year where it doesn't always get that juice.
Good for college basketball, but maybe not for long. On the women's side, right, the shift we saw last year, the women's tournament outrating the men's, the Caitlin Clark effect. Can that be maintained in her absence, Chris?
You know, I think a lot of it is Caitlin Clark. I mean, she was Pistol Pete. fun to watch. Dramatic story out of Iowa. I got to see that again. I understand it was, Reese was great too. South Carolina, I get all that. But Caitlin Clark was a huge factor. We saw her do great with the ratings. Let's see if they can create that huge star. But I have to see it to believe it. So I'll be the cynic there. And I think women's basketball last year was a little bit too much, was a little more about Caitlin than it was about the sport. Let's see if I'm proved wrong here this year.
Chris, I think you're right about that. It was so much about Caitlin, but a lot of that's just because of how amazing Caitlin Clark was. It wasn't, an overinflated attention to her. It was attention that she deserved, that she earned because of how great of a player she was. And in addition to that, she was entertaining. I mean, pulling up from the logo and just dropping them and understanding that this is not a bad shot for me is something that you just gravitate towards. I think the women's game is interesting because prior to Caitlin Clark, I was all in on the coaches. It was the coaches who I cared more about. One, and Dawn Staley, just because she's a UVA grad down at South Carolina. And then, as John was mentioning earlier, Gino Auriemma. My wife loved basketball growing up, and she, wanted to go to Connecticut when she was a player. She didn't obviously play in college, but Gino was the man. And so, to me, Caitlin was the anomaly because women's college basketball for so long has been about the great coaches and not necessarily the great individual players. Caitlin was a unicorn in that regard.
She is a unicorn. She creates a special type of interest, and Angel Reese did play a part in that, and that rivalry was good. Can women's basketball continue the momentum? Right. I do believe that this sport can continue to be in a good place. Why? Juju Watkins at USC now carries a torch out west. Paige Beckers is back at UConn, and she hasn't won that championship yet. And if she does, and Gino Auriemma gets another title, and that becomes sort of that final championship chapter for him, he's still coaching, I think, because one, he does love it, but two, he wants to have a last word in his career. He wants one more national championship for UConn. Now, it's been several years since they've won that title. That's a drought here in stores, if you will. We don't use that word very often here. But Hannah Hidalgo at Notre Dame. I think for the women's game, if you're a coach in this game, here's the best service you can do. When ESPN, when Fox Sports, when NBC Sports, when CBS Sports, when the major media companies come to you, coaches, and say, can we get Juju versus Paige, which is happening in December, in a primetime game? Can we get these star players facing each other? If you're a coach in this sport, you owe it to the fans, you owe it to your sport to say yes to a promoter. I will play in this game. I will put my superstar players in the best time slots. That's how women's basketball continues to ride this momentum, if it doesn't shy away from the spotlight.
One last quick one before we say goodbye. Juan Soto, where does he go and for how much? Chris.
I'm going to still say the Yankees. I know that Steve Cohen can offer more money than anybody else. And if it's just about dollars, he'd probably go to the Mets. But they did get to the World Series. Yankee Stadium is better than Citi Field. The Yankees historically are a more important franchise than the Mets. That's just the way it is. And he's got Judge sitting there hitting behind him with the Yankees. Another great player. And I don't think Howe can afford to lose him 6 miles away. Now, I know it's contrarian. Most people think in baseball he's going to leave. I'll go the other way. I'll say that he stays with the Yankees. Now, for $600 million, but I think he's not going to give him a discount. But I think at the end of the day, he'll stay with the Yankees.
Tiki.
We had this conversation the other day on our show, and I started thinking about how much money the top athletes in every sport make. The NBA, these guys are going to be making $100 million at some point. It's ridiculous. The top-paid quarterbacks, Dak Prescott, makes $60 million. Why won't Juan Soto make 55 or more a year? So I think he's going to sign a contract that's upwards of $720-something million. I also think it's going to be the Yankees, even though I will not rule out the L.A. Dodgers. The L.A. Dodgers are owned by Guggenheim. They have the private equity money, and Shohei Ohtani gave them a massive blank check, or at least a big checkbook to use because he deferred all of his money. They might go after Sasaki instead, but I think it's the Yankees, and if it's not, it's the Dodgers swooping in and doing something ridiculous. They spent $1 billion last year. Who's to say they won't do it again?
What about the Guardians, John? Sorry.
Yeah, that one's not happening there. Can you say down on the farm? No, the Guardians are extremely well run, and Chris Antonetti, as Dog knows well, has done a heck of a job with Mike Chernoff. But this is part of the disparity in baseball. We're talking Yankees, we're talking Dodgers. Here's the thing: Steve Cohen is prideful and will put out the blank check. And could he pay $750? Could he go higher than that? And what kind of a victory lap? Just imagine the victory lap in New York City and beyond. If he could say that he got Juan Soto. Here's the thing. It seems like such a wild dream that we've come to this, that the New York Mets could actually take a player of that magnitude from the Yankees, that I'm with these guys. I think Juan Soto ends up being a New York Yankee because I don't think you mess with Happy and the Yankees still have enough money. And Soto becomes legend when, and I believe if he comes back, it's when he and Aaron Judge get the Yankees a World Series title.
John Fanta, Tiki Barber, not borderline, and Chris Russo. Gentlemen, thank you so much.
I'm sorry.
Great seeing you on the Sports Reporters. It wasn't a great weekend for us old guys. Friday night, Mike Tyson at 58 fought exactly the way you'd expect a 58-year-old to fight in a meaningless exhibition. Poorly. I'm old enough to remember when George Foreman became the oldest heavyweight champion at 45, knocking out Michael Moorer. Foreman was a unique fighter with an enormous frame and a huge right hand, largely undulled by the years. Of course, Tyson now is much older and much further removed from his heyday. The last time we saw him in a real fight, he lost to Kevin McBride. That night in 2005, I asked him after he got knocked out, at what point in the proceedings did he know he was going to lose? And he said, when I signed the contract. The passion, the ambition, those were gone eons ago. Can we say the same about Aaron Rodgers? I'm not sure. What we do know is that what we've seen so far this season would suggest the Magic's running on empty. He's not 58, merely 40, but suddenly an old 40. Just ask Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas. Perhaps Ryan Costello of the New York Post said it best on Sunday when he tweeted, if his name wasn't Aaron Rodgers, you'd bench him at halftime. But not all the geriatrics are in decline. Look at Alex Ovechkin. So far this season, the 39-year-old has looked positively youthful as he closes in on the all-time record for goals. Sunday night, a hat trick, salvaging an otherwise dismal couple of days for those of us out of the demographic. Monday, 2 more goals, but he got injured, proving that getting old is not for the faint of heart. Now get off my ice. Thanks for joining us for the Sports Reporters.